Alright, we're here in beautiful Hood Mountain Regional Park, about to paint a creek scene here, and it's good conditions for painting because the lights pretty much overcast. There's a little bit of sun coming through here and there, so we will have some contrast to work with here, but pretty much going to be a mid-key scene until we get to where we, focus the attention toward. So, as always, beginning with the establishment stage, I'm going to do a quick little drawing of the scene by taking some burnt sienna and manganese blue and let's see, just for a little bit of extra help, I'm going to divide the canvas into quarters. And if we really want to, we can even try and divide into thirds. More or less there. So that gives us a little bit of compositional help. And let's see, what am I really looking at as far as a type of composition I want to create? I'm seeing, I don't know, overall the big lines of the scene are kind of doing this. And then maybe there's this branch that's making a shape here. Right now I'm looking at maybe the focus being these two boulders on the creek and this tree shape that comes up. Creek sort of continues on over this way. And trees. Branches kind of come up here. And okay. There's a branch that comes down here. Okay. What I'm doing here is actually looking for, if this is going to be our focal point, this kind of area right here, I'm looking for other little shapes that will point your eye in this direction. Maybe in that one a little bit. And that's really all I'm doing for the drawing stage, is just looking for marks that indicate what I'm going to be painting, and just putting those in rather than trying to define every shape with any detail. Just looking at the larger shapes. Maybe just indicating certain bigger shapes here and there in order to know where I'm going to block things into. So yeah, it's such a complicated scene with so much going on that you're going to have to simplify a lot of things and make sure that you don't try and paint everything, especially with the time we have. Reflection down here. Reflection of this tree branch is kind of pointing things at me. So I pretty much have so many lines here that are pointing us into the direction of where we want to focus. So I think for me that's enough to start jumping into the blocking stage. So I'm thinking that I want to go for this scene with dark to light, big to small shapes. So the biggest dark shape I could find, I think, is just this reflection that's created here in the creek. You grab some ultramarine blue and burnt umber. That's pretty much the darkest mixture I can make on my palette. And that's too dark, so let me bring it down. And also didn't have enough green in it. So take a little bit of white. A little bit of cadmium yellow as well. So most of the time when you are planning on lightening things up with your white paint, you want to mix in a color into it so that it doesn't change the temperature too much. So white as a modifier of color, meaning what a color that you mix into other paintings or other mixtures, is the coolest color you can go. Like it automatically cools everything down. There's nowhere else on the color wheel that will actually be warmed up by adding white to it. So it will always cool things down. So in order to lighten something and warm it up, you have to add a warm color into the white. So that's good to know that there's actually a darker range that I can get into. Next, create this shape of the creek going up the composition. So even though this is mostly water, I'm not automatically going to assume that blue is what is the main color in this creek. It's actually, the color is taking in all the greens of the forest, so there is actually a lot of green that makes up this color of the water instead. Okay. Behind it is the wall of the creek here, so it's actually pretty warm. So I'm taking burnt sienna, yellow ochre, and alizarin crimson to make this shape. I don't really care if I'm painting over my drawing at this point, because all I need it for is to tell me the boundaries of where I'm going to put these shapes. So the trunk is pretty close to the same color, but it's lighter and maybe has a little more pink in it. So I'm taking that same mixture and putting more white into it. Squinting at the seam to see what might be the next darkest shape. It's, I think, over here. A little bit of white into it. This is mostly white and burnt sienna. A little bit of alizarin. We'll worry about the green later. Got a little violet in there. There's a dark shape down here. It's not large, so I've been ignoring it for a while, but it helps me there. I guess I can move into the greens there. They're about mid-range, but they take up so much of the scene. I'm taking Viridian and Cadmium Yellow. Is that too bright? So, add a little violet. It's opposite on the color wheel, so that means it will gray it down and knock it down in value. So there's actually a difference in color temperature between these greens, and I'm just going to hint at it for now by adding a little bit of manganese blue into the mixtures. But I'm not going to worry too much yet about the actual color it is. Just being mindful, indicating it for me. Put in these trees. Get some burnt umber, white, and yellow ochre. And a little bit of, oops, that's too much cadmium red, but that's what I wanted. So I have that reflection in the water, so I gotta get that. That's too bright. lightest part of the painting. Mixing some yellow ochre with my cobalt violet hue and a little bit of cadmium red. And not going too light too early. So this is still like a high mid-range value I'm putting down. More white and this blue. Yellow. Moss on the tree there. Little shape of the rock over here. Again. Then I will finish this tree here. So I probably don't have enough cools yet, but I could do that when I start to add in the next step of this phase, which will be the light and shadow pattern. Next we'll do the light and dark pattern here. So start with the darkest parts. Still too big of a brush. The other one's too small. Go down to a what number? Oops. Well, the numbers are gone on this, but maybe get a good idea. Let's see. Let's start with the darks that are closest to my focal point. Make some ultramarine blue and burnt umber, a little bit of whatever was still on my palette. Things happening over here. So in order for things to stand out as dark here, they gotta be pretty dark. Because it's such a low mid-key scene here. Adding in some of these darkest darks because they're really helping me show where and how these shapes meet each other. They're going to be our sharpest edges in the end, I'm sure, as well. Start to lighten up my mixtures a bit, but still enough so that they read as darker than the shapes that were blocked in. dark enough, not cool enough. That branch back in. Branch leads into the focal point, kind of, with the shape that makes. Okay. This is all dark enough back here, I think. And the next dark shapes. Red on my brush somehow. Wipe that off. Gotta make sure not to let your color mixtures get contaminated, or at least if they do, clean it off before putting it down, because you don't want to just put color on that's wrong just because it was already on your brush. I don't have to commit to any really small shapes yet, so I don't care if I'm painting over some branch that I just put down kind of as a placeholder anyway. Tree branch, or tree trunk. Yeah, let's come in and put in some of these lighter shapes. Some white, yellow ochre, a little bit of burnt sienna. to like put some violet on top of it. There are a lot of small light shapes in this scene. So there's smaller shapes that I would normally like to start out with, but I definitely want to indicate them. A moss-covered rock back here that has a nice color to it. I don't want to go too light with it though. I don't want to distract too much from this area. For the color of the reflected object as its own separate color rather than just trying to recycle the same color as the actual object. It's pretty much never that color exactly. Moss on that. The highlight on this tree down here. Actually, I have to move this whole shape. The way we do that is just paint the shape into it. It's a little lighter up here, but not much. The thing about these gray days is that there's not a big difference in the value change between light and dark, at least in the mid-ground of the values that you're painting here. So you gotta make note of that and don't try to force anything to be too high contrast, if that's not what reality is. So just coming in, putting in the light shapes of some of these tree leaves. Green, gold, white, cadmium yellow, a little bit of iridium. Okay, that's pretty much the establishment phase. Just a couple little things here and there. Not totally necessary to put this in, but just kind of knowing that there will be trees out there. Find little spots of bare canvas now. It's a pretty good idea to get the entire canvas covered in paint, just so that there's not the white of the canvas throwing off your value comparisons on your own painting. Little differences in the reflection we're putting in. Okay, here we can move on into the comparison phase, and so let's pretty much start to compare what we're seeing on the let's start with the focal point and move out from there. So looking at the color of this rock here, it's a little more warm than I have it on my canvas, but it's actually pretty close. So I'm just going to add a little bit of yellow ochre into it. So if I know that's pretty correct, then I could just move on to the adjacent shapes from there and just keep working out. I'm looking at this trunk, it's a little more green in the trunk, maybe slightly darker there at that point. So adding some iridium into a mixture, making it darker. And then on this side, the shadow is actually warmer, so adding a little bit of cadmium red and violet to make this color. And as we go further out, it goes back to being a little cooler. A little blue and green gold. It kind of comes down right there. Step down to a smaller flat brush. Go with this one. Number 5, Rosemary & Co. Mongoose Replacement Brush. Switching to a flat to get more sharp angles and edges. Just comparing neighboring shapes to each other and seeing how much I need to change the color. Like this moss is actually more yellow ochre than I have. It was a little toward green before. Color of this grass in, painting it in a way that sort of indicates what it might be. This color here, or this shape here, actually has a little bit more violet in it than I had before, so put that in. Being careful to lay my brush down so it creates the shape of the object I'm painting just by the way I lay it down and pull across the canvas to make the brush stroke. And as it moves down, it gets darker and warmer. So I'll add a little bit of this dark mixture on my palette down here. Get that. And then bringing back in a little of that shadow that was lost here. Looking really intently at the color that I'm seeing in the reflection, or in the shadow there. A little bit of color being reflected into that shadow, so that's why it goes warmer there. And the shape next to it, lighter, but still has a lot of red in it. It's not even red, it's just maybe a warm brown. If I need a warm brown, I'll start with burnt sienna and add maybe cadmium red into it, very sparingly though. And that goes lighter here in the reflection. I go further and further out from the focal point, painting in these larger shapes because I'm simplifying a lot more of what else is going on. I want more of the detail and smaller shapes to be near the actual focal point. Just going in. Keep working out from here. Really just mainly looking at the value, but if the color needs adjusting, I'll make sure to do that too. The thing about painting this way with oils, you'll end up with a lot of mixtures that you can just take off of your palette, and if they approximate the color and value of what you're painting here, don't be afraid to just dip into that and modify it if you need to. So that's what I'm doing here. There was some sort of grayish brown dark mixture. Looked close enough to what I wanted, so I just went in and added some violet into it to make it more of a color I was actually after. Some white into this mixture. This tree is darker than the shape behind it, so that means the shape behind it needs to go lighter. It looks like it's a little cooler than I had before, so mixing in manganese blue hue. This mixture of green I have back here. And it's very leafy canopy out this way. I'm just kind of making dabs to indicate that. Distant trees. I'm just going to add a little bit of burnt sienna and maybe a little burnt umber actually. Get that color back here. Violet. Take some light color and carve out the shape of the tree branches back here by painting the negative shapes in. Move out this way. Manganese blue and white. Add some green gold to it. See what we get. A little too dark. A little more white, a little cadmium yellow. There we go. So in the course of painting this, I've kind of settled on mixtures that get me to what I want, and I just kind of keep creating them as I work. So I've noticed I'm using a lot of cobalt violet hue, a lot of burnt sienna, and a good amount of viridian and green gold as well. So I can just create a mixture of that on my palette and then just keep modifying it to get to what I want. Shape of this grass. Kind of got lost there, so that back in. Shape of that creek back in. Actually need a smaller brush. I actually get those rocks in the creek itself. Doing that. Add some manganese blue to my violet mixture. noticing a patch of light color back here that I missed the first time. I don't have to lock down into any of these light shapes that I made that indicate the tree leaves, so I don't mind painting over them. A little lighter, add a little bit of kind of yellow. And you notice there are only a few strokes that you can make before your color on your brush is way too different than what you wanted to put down, because it just picks up the color underneath. So make sure to clean your brush constantly. So yeah, just keep cleaning your brush off with a rag or a paper towel as you go, and they'll do a lot toward keeping your color mixtures cleaner, get better color out of it. Nothing worse than putting down a color that you think is correct only to realize that the color on your brush is contaminated. Just back here, it's a little darker, not quite that dark. So as I'm refining these shapes back here, I'm just refining the drawing as well. Mostly making value comparisons back here, but definitely still making color temperature consideration. Color is somewhere in between this burnt umber mixture that I had and the green mixture that I have on my palette as well. So just using that as a transition color in between each shape there. You know, these cuts aren't quite refined yet. Let's compare what's going on in the collection here. Get smaller shapes. Shape is stripped bark is lighter and warmer than that there. I don't want to go too much lighter because I don't want it to be lighter than that rock. So I won't go any lighter than that. Then I'll go darker and warmer on the bottom side of it. This trunk. There was a collection peeking underneath here. That need to be simplified, so I don't mind coming in and just totally painting over it, what was underneath. Tree branch is it has a lot of green in the trunk itself, so make sure to put a lot of green gold into it, indicating some of the branches that come off of here. And okay, the other thing I want to do for the comparison phase, probably I could maybe paint this branch. Yeah, I will. It's kind of a big shape that I went over. So the reason I'm not painting it like that is just it's too slippery that way. If I dab it in this way, there's a bit more of the canvas that the paint can grab onto. And it doesn't contaminate my brush as much. In order for this branch coming out up here to stand out, it has to go pretty dark in comparison. So just taking all the darkest colors in my palette and making something out of it. A little too cool, so a little bit of burnt sienna into it. Okay. And the light side of this branch coming out. Everything else is well compared, so it makes painting this a lot easier. Okay, time to move into the refinement stage, and I feel like that's all well compared, but there's not much actual substance and detail in there, so I'm fine. What will be my smallest bristle brush? Use that. Come in and put a little bit more color and texture onto what I've painted there. So just coming in and finding the small shapes within the shapes and painting those in. Here's where I could decide to push things one way or the other, like value if I feel like these shapes aren't reading as light enough, I'd come in and up the value contrast. Fill up my brush with a little more paint. Trying to stay within the same value range. Don't want there to be too many little jumps of value within the shape there, or else it just gets a little too messy. So instead, just adjusting the color temperature and the hue within the same values. Finding all the smaller shapes in there. Just keep going for as long as you want. long as you're still comparing things as you go, you'll really start to see all the detail. Bring this picture to life. Start to consider manipulating the edges more to get more realistic texture to what's going on. Squinting a lot at this stage to also see the way the edges meet each other. Softer edges as the dark shapes meet each other, where it's really hard edges is where the dark shapes really meet the light shapes. So just continue to work your way through the scene and find all the small shapes within the important areas. Maybe get in some of these rocks along the shore here. Oh, these little rocks have a light and dark pattern on them, so put that in. It's kind of fun what's happening in the reflection down here. It's like this. In that kind of brushiness that the reflection has, but making sure not to lose the dark of the shadow underneath there. Reflection of the shoreline in here too. It's kind of cool. Make that a little darker than the color of the shore itself. Sure to refine that out here too. Just want to make that read more like a reflection. And the shapes of the rocks. And the reflection here. A little moss on this rock, so I want to use that to indicate the edge of this rock. Made that with cadmium yellow and burnt sienna mostly. And one thing I haven't really spent much time on in this painting is the actual running water of this creek. You really got to treat that like a shape in and of itself. So each little part has its own sort of reflection happening off of it. Just really tiny little shapes. The stream itself isn't very big, so there's not a lot to really indicate here, but really just put where the highlights are, and that's for this scene, all you really need to do to indicate that there's running water. Continuing to paint the colors and shapes I see in the reflection. The edges in the reflections are going to be softer than the actual shape or the actual object that's reflecting inside of it. That's what will help it look more like water as well. Collection of this trunk in the water. Put a piece of bark in. Weird half shadow here, but it helps give this trunk a little more volume. Let's indicate some of the individual leaf clusters in here. Like Cadiel and Viridian. Still too light, add more Viridian. Actually going to darken it with manganese blue. I don't want to go too dark or too cool just yet. Just enough to start indicating some of these tree leaves back here. What else I got left? The tree branch coming down a little bit more detail back into that. So in the very foreground, there are oak leaves coming down from this branch, and I'll just put in a few here and there. But I feel like what it will do is give extra depth for to the scene we're looking at here. And using the shape of my brush to, like the brush corners, to make the leaves. And just kind of observing the way that the shape of the leaves are. I'm doing something that approximates it with the way I put my brush down. Don't go too overboard with that. Just add a few kind of near the focal areas, and then let the rest kind of fade off. If you add too much detail over here, it distracts from what's going on. In the focal area. Just adding some branches, making sure they're not too dark, but just enough to read as branches. And, let's see. Any other little details I can put into, make the focal point stand out more. Shape of this rock still seems a little basic to me. Maybe I can capture the character of the real life rock a little bit more in my paintings. And just separate from the water and the reflection of it a little bit better. Maybe we'll add a little grass blades. Okay, yeah, for a study of this size, that's plenty of detail for it. Like, I totally could have stopped earlier, but I just really wanted to capture the scene a little bit more refined. So we got lucky that the light didn't change too much on us, so that definitely helped, but tackled a few issues. One being a complicated creek scene. How do you refine all that? Or how do you simplify a complicated creek scene enough so that you're not overwhelmed in the beginning, and just handling also not a real strong definite lighting situation. But I think we found a good solution to that as we painted. So okay, and that is how we paint a creek scene.